The king and pawn endgame. It is the most fundamental endgame in chess, and understanding it is considered essential for any serious player. When most pieces have been traded off the board, the king transforms from a piece that needs protection into an active fighter. The key concept is opposition. When two kings face each other with one square between them, the player who does not have to move holds a significant advantage. Pawn promotion is almost always the ultimate goal, and whether a pawn can be escorted to the 8th rank often comes down to precise king positioning and the subtleties of zugzwang. Many games that appear drawn are actually won or lost based entirely on who understands these principles more deeply. The Rook endgame. Rook endgames are the most common endgames in practical chess, and they are notoriously difficult to play correctly even for strong players. The fundamental principle is activity. A rook belongs behind a passed pawn, whether it is your own or your opponent's. The Lucena position and the Philidor position are the two most important theoretical structures every player must know. The Lucena shows how to win with a rook and pawn against a rook, while the Philidor demonstrates the drawing technique for the defending side. Entire books have been written on rook endgames alone, and even grandmasters regularly misplay them under time pressure. The Queen endgame. Queen endgames are among the most complex and double-edged in all of chess. The queens are so powerful that even a material advantage does not always guarantee a win. The losing side can often create perpetual check threats that force a draw. When a queen faces a passed pawn close to promotion, the stronger side must be careful about stalemate traps that the defending king can walk into. Queen versus pawn endgames have specific theoretical outcomes depending on which file the pawn is on, and the difference between a winning and drawing position can come down to a single tempo. The bishop endgame. Bishop endgames come in two distinct varieties: same-colored bishops and opposite-colored bishops, and they play out very differently. Opposite-colored bishop endgames are famous for their drawing tendencies, even when one side is a pawn or two ahead, because the defending bishop can control squares the attacking bishop can never reach. Same-colored bishop endgames are far more decisive, and the placement of pawns relative to the bishop's color becomes critically important. A bishop that is blocked by its own pawns on the same colored squares is known as a bad bishop, and avoiding this structure is a key strategic concern throughout the entire game. The knight endgame. Knights are short-range pieces that thrive in closed, complex positions where their ability to jump over other pieces becomes an asset. In endgames with pawns on both sides of the board, a knight can be surprisingly effective because it can reach any square given enough time. However, knights struggle in open positions where a bishop can control long diagonals from a distance. Knight versus pawn endgames require precise calculation because the knight's irregular movement makes it easy to miscalculate whether it can catch a passed pawn in time. The concept of the knight outpost, a protected square deep in enemy territory, remains important even as the board empties. The rook and minor piece endgame. When a rook faces a bishop or knight with pawns still on the board, the side with the rook has a theoretical advantage, but converting it is far from simple. The defending side can often achieve a draw by keeping the minor piece active and avoiding pawn weaknesses. Rook versus knight endgames tend to be more difficult to convert than rook versus bishop because the knight's unpredictable movement makes it harder to coordinate against. The key for the stronger side is to create passed pawns and use the rook's long-range power to dominate open files while restricting the defending piece. The pawn endgame. Beyond king and pawn endgames, there are positions with multiple pawns for both sides, where no pieces remain on the board at all. These positions are governed entirely by pawn structure, king activity, and the concept of breakthrough, a sequence of pawn sacrifices that forces at least one pawn through to promotion even when the opponent tries to block. The outside pass pawn is one of the most powerful weapons in a pawn endgame, as it can be used to deflect the opposing king away from the main action. Triangulation is another key technique, allowing a king to lose a tempo and reach the same position with the opponent to move. The theoretical draw. Not every endgame is a fight for a win. Some positions are simply drawn no matter how well one side plays, and recognizing them immediately saves enormous time and energy. King and bishop versus king, king and knight versus king, and king and two knights versus king are all theoretical draws because there is simply no mating material available. Even with extra pawns, certain endgames like opposite-colored bishops with limited pawns have drawing mechanisms so reliable that top players will often agree to a draw the moment the position arises. Knowing which endgames are theoretically drawn is just as important as knowing how to win the ones that are winnable. The Double Rook endgame. When both sides retain 2 rooks, the endgame takes on a different character compared to single rook positions. 2 rooks working together are extraordinarily powerful. They can cut off the opposing king along both ranks and files simultaneously, coordinate to support a passed pawn from both behind and in front, and deliver checkmate with very little assistance from the king. The 7th rank is the most coveted destination for a rook pair, and 2 rooks on the 7th rank are often enough to win on their own. Converting a double rook advantage requires less precision than a single rook endgame, but the attacking side must still remain alert to perpetual check threats from the defending rooks, the bishop and knight endgame. Endgames featuring a bishop and knight for one side against a lone king are theoretically winning, but notoriously difficult to execute. The checkmate requires driving the opposing king into a corner that the bishop controls, which demands precise coordination between all 3 pieces over many moves. Most players know the result is a forced win, but very few can actually demonstrate the technique over the board. It requires memorizing a specific procedure and executing it accurately under pressure. At the club level, this endgame is frequently misplayed and drawn even when the winning technique is theoretically available, making it one of the most instructive and humbling positions in all of chess. The rook and bishop endgame. When one side has a rook and bishop against a lone rook, the stronger side holds a theoretical advantage, but the practical winning chances are surprisingly limited. The defending side can often establish the Philidor-style drawing technique, using the rook to cut off the opposing king, and the lone rook to harass the attacking pieces. The position of the kings and the activity of the pieces matter far more than the material count alone. Positions where the defending king is pushed to the edge of the board offer the best winning chances, but even then precise technique is required, and many such endgames are saved with accurate defense. The rook and knight endgame. A rook against a knight with pawns on the board is one of the most practically important endgames to understand, as it arises frequently from normal middle game play. The rook holds a theoretical advantage, but the knight's ability to create forks and jump to unexpected squares makes it a stubborn defender. The winning side must use the rook to restrict the knight's mobility while advancing pawns and activating the king. A knight that loses contact with the pawn structure becomes dangerously passive and easy to trap, but a centralized knight with good outposts can hold a draw against even precise rook play. The endgame rewards patient, methodical technique over sharp calculation.